Part 4 of Chapter 11 is devoted to planning for risk. The most important outcome or deliverable of this risk management process is the so-called risk management plan. It's a document that contains a plan outlining all the procedures for managing risks throughout a project. Now, before formulating a risk management plan and during the process of formulating or creating a risk management plan, the project team should review project documents and understand the organizations and the sponsors, meaning project sponsors, approaches to risk. Some projects are risky by nature. They are initiated by companies to pursue risky opportunities that can potentially result high reward for the organization, while other risks are more they're more mundane. They don't involve any risky endeavors. They're rather initiated to incrementally improve organizational performance. So depending on the nature of the project, you may have a different plan for dealing with risk. Also, the level of detail will vary with the needs of the project. Some projects are fairly small and simple. In that case, you may not have a very detailed risk management plan, while other projects may span multiple years and involve many stakeholders from across the organization. In that case, the detail of your risk management plan, the level of detail for your risk management plan may be much higher. Also, there are some risky startup projects where it's not clear what exactly needs to be done. Because it's not clear what exactly needs to be done, you may not be very clear about the risks. Because it's hard to analyze something that you don't have full awareness of. So in that case, the risk management plan can be very agile and sketchy, so that you can respond to potentially any risk, any situation. While again, if you're doing something that is more mundane, something that is very well understood by the company, you may have more detail in your risk management plan. So once again, the level of detail will vary depending on the nature of the project and the needs of the organization. Now, some of the important topics or sections in a risk management plan include the methodology that outlines your overall approach to risk management, roles and responsibilities of people involved in your project, and also people responsible for managing risks, budget and schedule, risk categories, also the probability and impact of each risk that you identified, any other risk documentation that is helpful in understanding risks and understanding your strategies to responding to potential risks that may arise in the future. Now, some crucial elements of a risk management plan are the so-called contingency plans. This is something that is at the heart of risk management. A contingency plan are predefined actions that the project team will take if an identified risk event occurs. In other words, if something goes wrong, so what are we going to do? What are we planning to do as a team? Something related to that are fallback plans. They're developed for risks that have a high impact on meeting project objectives and are put into effect in attempt to reduce the risk if the attempts to reduce the risks are not effective. So what it means there are some events that have a high impact on your project, and if you cannot somehow address this risky event, you still need to move forward somehow with the project. So you need to have a fallback plan. I think a more common term for that is Plan B. I mean, if nothing works out, what you're going to do to make sure your project still goes forward. Also, another important element of a risk management plan are the so-called contingency reserves or allowances. Those are the provisions held by the project sponsor organization to reduce the risk of cost or schedule overruns to an acceptable level. So basically, it means allocating some free float, allocating some extra time and extra money to certain high-risk activities, because something that everybody knows is that the more risky, the more strategic, the more complex an activity is, the more likely that something will go wrong and you will overspend or go over the timeline. So that's why it's important to create some contingency reserves or allowances for those strategic elements of a project. Now, several studies show that IT projects share some common sources of risks. Nevertheless, there's no framework, there's no widely accepted framework for categorizing all the risks. So one of the approaches to categorizing risks was developed by the Standish Group. So they developed an IT success potential scoring sheet based on potential risk. In other words, they give you like some success factors or considerations that are very important, and which has an importance calculated based on the number and severity of risks associated with each of those areas and categories. So they can help you. This framework by Standish Group can help you start thinking about risk. But there are many other categories of risk and classifications of risk that you can use for creating a risk breakdown structure. So this is the framework created by the Standish Group. So here they give you like some of the strategic areas where you need to devote your attention to make sure that nothing or very little goes wrong in relation to your project. Routinely, many studies, including the studies performed by the Standish Group, say that user involvement and executive support are the two most important factors. So a lot of risks, they come from these two areas: failure to get users on board and get them involved in your project, to share their expectations, their needs, can seriously jeopardize the chances of your project being completed, because if you don't get users involved, you may end up developing something that your users will never accept and will not use. Executive support is very important. Some studies put it as number one. If you have a powerful executive sponsor within an organization who is willing to devote the necessary resources and pull all the necessary strings for you to get done, then you're more likely to succeed. If you don't have somebody powerful within the organization that you're working on your project, supporting your project, then there's a big chance that you will fail, no matter how talented you are as a project manager and no matter how much time you devote to your project. Then clear statement of requirements. It's something related to scope is also a very important factor. A lot of project risks come from the fact that requirements are not clear, or they are changed. The scope is changed throughout the duration of the project. So it's worthwhile to think about the risk coming from this area as well. And then you have other important considerations. You can pause this video for a minute or two and reflect on the things that can go wrong in relation to project planning, where not a proper plan, where a plan that you created is not realistic, is not appropriate, and a lot of risk can arise from that. Also, unrealistic expectations, what can and cannot be done within the constraints of your project. Not using smaller project milestones and trying to accomplish everything with a big bang. Competent staff, to me it's surprising that it has a relatively low ranking. I think staff competency, the fact that your staff is motivated and qualified to perform work, I think it's one of the top risk areas. Ownership, meaning the project is clearly sponsored and owned by several stakeholders, so it's clear who you're doing it, who is your friend when it comes to delivering this project. Whether employees view your project as something that they need or something that is unnecessary bureaucracy is very important. Clear vision and objectives are also important. Also hardworking, focused staff. Although once again, hardworking, focused staff, to me, it's very important. I would put it somewhere at the top, but those are the findings of the Standish Group. So here you see another way of classifying risks and also brainstorming about the things that can go wrong. So here we have market risks, something that can happen on the outside of your project or on the outside of the organization where your project is carried out. One example is some kind of economic downturn that reduces funding across the organization, including funding for your project. Financial risks, overspending, not getting the necessary funding for your project. Technology risks, something goes wrong with the technology itself. Let's say the technology that you want to use for your project is not reliable enough or not mature enough. People risks, you lose some people or you fail to attract the necessary team members on time, so you don't have the human expertise to carry out your project. And then something related to the structure or processes. Let's say something is not working well because, let's say, your project team comprises people across different organizational units and there's no formal process for them to interact with you because they're reporting to their supervisors, and those supervisors are not properly included in your project. So something related to processes, to management. So this is another way to classify risk. Now, another way to classify risk is in terms of the project management knowledge areas. So typically we have the following knowledge areas under project management: project integration, scope, time, cost, and quality management, then human resource management, communications management, risk management, and procurement management. So risk can also arise from any of those categories. Now, regardless of which way of classifying risks and which approach to brainstorming about possible risk you choose, at the end you need to create something that resembles a work breakdown structure. Although in this case we're not talking about tasks or work items, we're talking about risks related to a project. So your risk breakdown structure is a hierarchy of potential risk categories for a project. They're granular and at the same time grouped into areas, particular areas or groups, depending on which classification you choose. So, for example, using one of the classification, your risk breakdown structure can be formulated as follows. So you have higher order categories here, such as business risks, technical risks, organizational risks, and project management risks. Then each of them is subdivided into further level 2 categories. So this is level 0, level 1, level 2. And then within level 2, you can have level 3, which means specific risk items belonging to specific level 2 categories. So this is how a potential risk breakdown structure can look like.